And welcome back to another episode of TWiP Weddings. My name is Bruce Clark, and once again, I am joined by one of my usual co-hosts, Mr. Robert Evans. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on what time of day you are listening to this.
Yes. So no Brian this week. Brian had a session today, so he wasn't able to join us, but hopefully we'll get him on the next show. But we're going to have an interesting conversation this morning. I think this is a topic that's, probably strikes a nerve with a lot of wedding photographers, and that's the topic of unplugged weddings and how we handle, let's call them over-enthusiastic wedding guests with cameras who want to get in on the photography action. Is that a politically correct way of putting it? Excellent. So that's going to be our topic today. But before we get into the show, we want to remind you how you can participate. And we've got several different ways you can interact with the show. First, visit the website, thisweekinphoto.com. There you will find our show under the Weddings tab and lots of other great shows on the TWiP network. But go to our show, and then you'll find the show notes for each episode. And those show notes will contain the links to everything that we talk about today. If you have a question or a suggestion of a topic that you'd like us to cover in a future episode, you can email us at twipwed@thisweekinphoto, or you can just click on the Contact Us button on the main page, choose Weddings, and that message will come into us. If you prefer using social media, just add the hashtag TWIPWed to your post, or we're also on Instagram and Facebook. So Facebook's another great spot, lots of discussion happening on there. We get new members joining our group every week and some great questions being posted there. So lots of ways you can get in touch with us and interact. So let's get into it. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, this week we're going to talk about unplugged weddings. And I think you would agree, Robert, that wedding photography it's composed of a lot of once in a lifetime moments, right? Moments that happen basically in an instant. And our job as wedding photographers is to make sure that those moments are captured. So we've got lots of things going on in our, we've got the creative aspects, we've got the technical aspects, we've got lighting, composition, camera settings. We've got a lot of things to think about on the wedding day, right?
Right.
But these days, more and more, it seems like we have another challenge, and that is the over-enthusiastic wedding guests who want to get in on the photography action with their cell phones, their tablets, their SLRs. I haven't encountered drones yet, but have you?
Not from a guest.
Not from a guest, not yet. I'm waiting for that to come.
As soon as personal drones are, out, the ones that just follow you around and record your life.
They're here already. They're out already.
Yeah.
DJI announced that new.
Yeah, but that's a little big. I'm sure someday there'll be ones that are like, the size of a small bird that'll just buzz around and follow you.
Well, there was that Kickstarter project that came out a little while ago, and apparently it's out now. Somebody that I know got in on it. It was a couple of years ago it came out, and it's a little small, little drone. It'll follow you around. I forget what it was called, but they're out now. Apparently, he got a shipping notice the other day. So,
oh, good.
It's on the horizon. It's coming. So, but
get out your shotguns.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, get your trained drone hawks.
Right.
Drone hunting pigeons or whatever we have. But so the topic of unplugged weddings, I think, has been, would you say the unplugged wedding is a relatively new phenomenon within the last couple of years, or has it been around for a while? You've been around for a while shooting. Has the dealing with photography over enthusiastic guests with cameras been a problem for a long time, or is it new?
Yeah, that's been a problem for a long time. I mean, I just think the volume of people now that you deal with, it used to be, I always called them the Uncle Harrys that had the nice cameras, and they'd come to the wedding and they'd be shooting over my shoulder, or laying in the aisle during the ceremony, or doing anything to embarrass themselves. And I think my biggest problem with it was, well, A, if they were getting in my way, but B, like, I didn't want people to think that they were with me.
Right.
So that was always, we've always had that, or during group shots, there might be 5 or 6 people standing around taking pictures as well. And then you get the, bride and groom get their pictures back, and eyes are not at my camera, they're other places, and then they could be mad at me, like, why is nobody looking? Well, because you let your friends take pictures. Well, and I very cautiously, like, over the years, have educated my clients on these points. And I think, that's why we do this and talk about that. But that's really the best solution, is really just, being proactive in educating your clients and talking about, what could unfold at their wedding. And, here's some things that you can do to prevent that.
Yeah. So the idea of the unplugged wedding maybe is newer in the sense that now we're having to deal with, like you say, it's been around for a long time. You've always had guests with cameras, be it, SLRs, or back in the day, they had their point and shoots or whatever it was they brought. But now it's everybody has,
Right.
one of these with them. I'm holding up my iPhone right now, but everybody, these days, typically now they have some kind of device with them that's capable of taking photos.
Correct.
Be it a tablet, be it a phone. So the concept of the unplugged wedding. So for those who are maybe new, thinking about getting into wedding photography, or maybe they haven't been to a lot of weddings, so explain the concept of an unplugged wedding as you kind of understand it.
Well, if you go full unplugged, I guess it's asking your guests just, flat out, however they do it via an invitation or something else that goes out in their invitations, just not to take pictures at the wedding with their devices, their phones, their cameras, because they've hired a professional photographer. If I got the unplugged part of the wedding just during the ceremony, I think I would be happy about that. I don't mind people taking photographs with their phones at weddings, as long as they're not being obnoxious about it. But the biggest problem that I've seen, and it's really a disappointment, is really actually during the ceremony, because people are not actually engaged in the ceremony. They're more worried about the photos that they're going to take. And really, I see this the most during pre-sessional and recessional, especially when the couple's coming down the aisle afterwards, because it used to be, you'd go up there, you'd back down the aisle, taking photographs of the couple smiling and, elated. They just got married. It's the happiest point in their whole day. And I would purposely shoot, maybe with a wider lens so that I get the faces of the people in the audience. But now you typically you see that, but there's a phone blocking their expressions, meaning the people in the audience, because they're also, oh, I got to get this picture. And I really ask myself, why? Like, why do the guests feel the need to, have that photo? And I think it's a very selfish need, is like, because everybody wants to be the first one to put it out on social media, like, oh, look, Dave and Lisa just got married and I'm the first one to post a really crappy photo.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that before we go further, because that reminded me of something, an important talking point. So when we go back to the unplugged wedding, for me it goes back even further. It goes back to the morning, the getting ready. And I don't know if you've experienced this or if you've had this happen, but have you ever had a situation where one of the bridesmaids or a mother or a friend who's there, they take a photo of the bride in the dress, and then, oh, I'm on Instagram or whatever, and then the groom sees it.
Yep.
Because they're on Instagram or whatever, right? And so now they've seen their bride before they've seen their bride, because some dummy posted the photo before anybody else could see it. Have you encountered that?
Yeah, definitely. And those are the two things that I sort of educate my brides about. Again, I'll say, look, if you can get your ceremony to be unplugged, and I talk about the whole social media thing. Even, that's a big one, obviously, and I'll bring that point up. Like, this has happened before, and I've seen brides upset about it. But really, like, asking the guests not to post anything for a week or two, or at least until the bride can post. And so now I find myself, which I don't mind because it helps me out, having to pull like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 images, that evening or whenever, and, getting them to the bride and groom to post for social media so that they can actually put out the first images. Because here's the problem: in the past, with everybody, taking pictures at the wedding and posting, 2-3 weeks later, maybe by the time the photographer gets the couple their images, people are over that wedding. People are sick of seeing Lisa and Dave's wedding. Mm-hmm. And when the nice pictures finally come out, nobody really cares.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh my gosh, I've seen so many pictures of this wedding. Who cares?
Yeah, it's a photo fatigue almost, right? Like,
right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been my experience too, right? Is you think, oh, okay, now we've delivered the images, people are going to be really excited about it, because they posted some just crap cell phone pictures, blurry, out of focus, whatever, and it got like 300 likes, and then they actually post the actual beautiful shot that we get, and it gets like 20 likes, and you're like, what like, what is going on? Like, it's not,
Right.
so it's not about the photography. It has nothing to do about the photography. It's just people are caught up in the moment and they're excited by the moment. And so it's completely
Right.
separate. So yeah, that's a
Right.
challenge
Yeah.
we have to deal with.
2 weeks later, nobody cares if they've seen pictures sporadically for the last 2-3 weeks for Lisa and Dave's wedding. They're like, oh, there's another photo. I've my finger hurts because I've liked their wedding photos so much.
Yeah. Have you even experienced it where even sometimes the couples aren't excited?
Yeah, I mean, you look at that, like back in the day when we shot film, usually my couples got their pictures roughly about 2 weeks following their wedding. And that was because, it took a week to get the film process. Like typically if we turned our film in on Monday, it was back on Friday. I could quickly edit the job, put it in a sequence, throw away my edits and I'm done. But generally the couple was on a honeymoon. So it wasn't until like a week later that they actually came in the studio to pick up the pictures.
Right.
And I think there's something to be said about that sort of like that mystery of that time where they're like excited to see the pictures. And even today I just did a wedding this last weekend up in New York, and the planner's bugging me the very next day for a couple pictures because she has to show the bride and groom. Everybody wants to, everyone's so narcissistic about it that they have to be the first and to show their work and the this and the that. And I want that excitement, and we have the ability to do it. But I think it's fun to just tease them with a couple. But, I think people, if they keep themselves in suspense, so to speak, I think the joy of going through their photos is much better after, a 2-3 week period.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it goes back to that whole kind of instant gratification thing that we've talked about before, just even with photographers wanting that fast track to success. They want it now. They don't want to wait for anything. It's the same with a lot of people now. Everything is instant gratification. They want it right now. They don't want to wait for it. When if Wi-Fi is slow and they can't get their Netflix right away, they get upset, right? Or if they're on a plane now and they can't, get their email, people get upset. And it's like, you're on a plane,
right?
It's this instant gratification society that we just have to have it now, and it's so that we're up against that, right? And I think sometimes that's hurt us a little bit as photographers, right? Is that's taken a little of that excitement and the anticipation away from seeing photos, because they just see so many photos from everybody else, particularly now if guests are really embracing it and going the other direction and going with a plugged in ceremony where
right.
They've got hashtags and they've got, I've seen them live streaming at the reception, photos that have been posted to Instagram with a certain hashtag where they're coming up on the screen. Like that's kind of the other extreme we run up against. I want to go back to just the unplugged thing for a minute. So, for me, the unplugged, when we're talking to our clients, obviously the having an unplugged ceremony is a great thing for us because it's one less obstacle to get in our way potentially. But I think for us, an important thing is we talk to our couple and say, like, what do you want to see when you look out at the people in the church or at the ceremony site or wherever it is that you're getting married? What do you guys want to see when you turn and look out at the audience? What do you want to see? Do you want to see the faces of your friends and family, or do you want to see people buried in their tablets and their iPhones?
Do you want to see this?
Yeah, and
for those of you watching, you get a good visual of not my face.
Yes, Robert is blocking his lovely face with his phone. So that's and some people are okay with that. They say, well, that's the time we live in, right? That's the era that we live in, and it is what it is. Some people are, but other people can say, well, no, we really want people to be not only there, but just present, right? As long as they've got that device with them, there's always that, I guess, that allure to do something else while maybe they're taking a photo, but maybe they're just browsing Facebook, or, maybe they're just bored by the ceremony. And so that, the worst for me is when I see the parents, they're in the front row and they're sitting there on their phones or in front of their cameras or whatever. And every shot where you're trying to get like a nice emotional moment of them seeing their kids getting married, mom's there hanging onto dad's arm, crying, and dad's got the camera up in front of his face. And you're just like, it just ruins the moment.
Or worse, surfing Facebook.
And I just want to walk over and smack the camera out of their hand. I'm like, your kids are getting married. Like, put the camera down. I'm going to try and keep our clean tag. And be present, be there in the moment. That's why you're there, and it's frustrating. Have you ever had people in the wedding party, like bridesmaids or groomsmen, pull it out, like not the cameras, cameras, during the ceremony at all to get like a selfie or anything like that? Have you ever had that happen?
I have a good story. And I actually have a photo of it. So I was doing a Jewish wedding a couple of years ago. And when the bride was signing the ketubah, the groom jumped up with his own phone and was taking a picture of his wife signing the ketubah. So here I have like the whole, I have the parents in the background or whatever, and I have the groom, taking a picture of the wife signing the ketubah instead of just sitting there smiling and watching and going, wow, I'm getting married right now. Because of course in a Jewish ceremony, the second you sign that document, you're married.
Yeah.
So it's just, I was like, okay, I've seen it all,
Yeah.
when it comes to that. Like it's just those, like you hit it on the head. It's like be present in the moment, be there, whether you're a guest, whether you're the bride and groom, whether you are, in the bridal party. I think it's super important to just be present. And really, like, this all comes down, we can talk about all the different things, but it comes back to talking to your couples ahead of time and educating them and asking the questions like you brought up, Bruce, like, what do you guys want to see? Or
maybe they want to see that, right? And that's okay too. Like if they're cool with that and that's what they want to see, that's fine. We'll capture that, right? But I think a lot of them, when they pause and they think about it, they're like, no, that's not what I want to see. Like, I don't want to see that at my wedding, right? They might think initially like, oh yeah, it's fine. And then they think about it more and you bring up some of those issues. And then when they think about it, they're actually, no, you know what? That is not what I want at my wedding, right? So sometimes they don't even think about it. It's not something they even consider, right? Maybe they haven't been to a lot of weddings recently or whatnot, right? So they don't even consider it. But so it's our job, I think, to at least present it and educate them and give them the option and let them know, like, hey, this is what could happen. This is what can happen. This is what we've seen. This has been our experience. Ultimately, it's your guys' wedding. You get to decide.
Correct. And I think that's important to word it that way. Like, here, I want to, if you're wondering, like, how do you approach this topic with your couple?
Yeah.
You're like, so let's talk about the wedding day. And I said, I want to talk to you about, cell phones and social media. And I'm going to just give you my experience as the professional, as a photographer, and what I've seen. But ultimately, it's your wedding, and I want you to be happy. So, you just let me know how I feel about this. But I prefer that, of course, during the ceremony, nobody have their phones, and whatever your policy is going to be on that, no phones at all. Telling the couple how to go about it, whether it be sticking another little piece of paper into their invitation, having the minister say something, having signs by the sign-in book when people come into the church. Absolutely no photography during the ceremony, cell phones otherwise.
I was going to ask you, what have you found has been the most effective? Because I've seen all of those things, right? Like brides and grooms put it in.
I think you honestly need to do all of the above.
Yeah, you think everything?
If you put it, little, talk to your people who are doing your paper for your wedding and say, can we put a little card in there that says, at least if it's during the ceremony, we prefer that you do not take pictures. And of course, especially if they're sensitive about posting to social media, that needs to go in an invitation, because otherwise, how is it going to get out there to every single guest?
But people, do you find though, people still don't respect that? There's always,
I mean, we have laws and rules, but people still break them.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you can't
speed, and we still rob stores, and
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, but is there a way to explain? Like, I find sometimes if they just make the announcement and say no photos during whatever, but they don't actually explain the reasoning behind it. I find some people get defensive about it and say, well, I'm not going to be told what I can't do. I'm going to get in there and take pictures. And often they look at us and think that we're the ones responsible for the no photography, right?
Correct. And ultimately we are, but I actually had somebody, the wedding I did in London in early September, she was very adamant about it, nice high-end wedding. And she, somebody made some kind of snide comment to me. She's like, can I take a picture now? And I just looked at the woman and smiled. And I was like, didn't come from me. That's the bride's choice. Well, I, of course, educated her about it and made her think about it, but I don't care. I just put it back onto the bride. Like, don't take blame for it. Yeah, you can be the instigator, but, if you can just politely say, yeah, that was the bride's choice. But I think the sign, like I've seen that's pretty effective before, signs by the sign-in book, or like as you come into church, you could even blame, not everybody gets married in a church. Of course, I understand that, but you could, blame it on the location if that were the case. Yeah, that, most churches have a don't take photo policy anyway, or at least no flash, That's been my experience over the years. But if you have something that's, there, or it could even be something that's, if you don't want to, if you think, as a bride and groom, I know bride and grooms aren't listening to this, but it's photographers giving them ideas, is maybe if they think it's tacky to put something in their invitation, maybe they have something printed that's placed on the seats where the guests will sit, because there's always usually like a little ceremony card or something, it could be a separate, or it could be part of the program for the ceremony, that it, very boldly says, please, no cell phone cameras, or, we've hired professional photographers. Please, be part of the moment, and not in, we request that you do not post to social media, until we get to post ours first. And I mean, I think if you're a guest at somebody's wedding, unless you're kind of a selfish bastard, like you're gonna respect that.
Yep.
Of course, she's sort of admonished her bridal party and the bridesmaids and the groomsmen. They probably definitely know not to do it. But it's, it's just educating the guests. And there's many ways to do it. There's many tactful ways to do it. And you're going to get people that break the rules. But
yep. And we're talking specifically we're talking a lot about during like the ceremony is that's the big one, right? Like the ceremony is the big one, because there's some stuff that happens there. It only happens like once, and sometimes all you get is one shot, one frame at certain critical moments, because they don't, they're not going to repeat signing something over and over and over again. Like you mentioned the signing of the ketubah. They're not going to do that like multiple times, right? You might get a couple of frames of that. The first kiss is another one. Like that moment happens so quickly. And I had a situation just a couple of years ago, where I was a little ways back, because I like to go back a little bit and shoot with a longer 70-200. So I'm not right up in the front. I'm usually down a little ways, maybe a quarter of the way down the aisle. And the father of the bride, literally at the exact second that the first kiss was about to happen, I'm all set up, I'm all ready to go, he pops out of his seat right smack in front of me with his little crappy point and shoot camera, sitting there like as they, trying to looking at the back of the screen, trying to capture the first kiss. And I'm just like, what? And I had to like sort of step off to the side, and I managed to get kind of a shot, but just, it was more of an angled shot. And I got a shot of him doing it first.
Right. So I was going to say that's super important. Like if that happens to you, photographers, like take that picture, take the picture of the person that's like in the way, so that if it ever comes back to you and they're like, well, why didn't you get the picture of the kiss? Or you're like, well, here's why. Because here's your father or your father or someone jumped in the way. So why don't you just use that picture in the book?
Yeah. How about we put that in the album? Yeah. So I made sure, to capture that moment, plus sidestepped him, and I got a shot of the first kiss, but it wasn't the straight angle that I wanted, right? So, and then of course my wife she was second shooting, she got it from a different angle, but neither of us ended up with the straight on shot because good old dad was in the way, right? And you're just like, come on, like, so I think it's during the ceremony specifically. Like I have no problems, bridal party, they're having a good time, they're going to take selfies, and I get all that during the rest of the day. That's fine, just knock yourselves out. But it's during the ceremony particularly that becomes a problem. Do you find, now there are certain cultural weddings where I find the prevalence of electronic devices greater than others. Have you encountered that?
Yeah, I guess I've noticed that. And, again, what can you do about it? You just have to, again, your best defense is a good offense, meaning that you're going to educate your couples before and say, here's what could happen. How are you going to feel? What are your thoughts about this? You have a discussion. You've done your due diligence then at that point. And if the wedding turns out to be a camera fiasco, well, you just do your best to capture it, and they get what they get, and they can't throw a fit.
Yep. The only people they can get upset with at that point would be family, like, because they'll be able to identify them in the photos, right? Like, oh yeah, there's Uncle Jim with his tablet in the middle of the aisle, right? So, so it goes back to, and we've had a talk on this before about setting expectations, setting expectations when it comes to this stuff so that they know this is the potential that could happen. Do you do anything? So let's say, so I know another photographer, Heather Jowett. I want to get her on the show to talk about customer service because she spoke at CPC. She was great. She actually offers a discount to her couples if they do an unplugged wedding. Have you heard of other photographers doing something?
That's a good idea.
Similar? Yeah. So she actually gives them a discount.
Elaborate.
Yeah. So basically, it's just, I don't know the full what she does exactly, but I just know she offers a discount if they do an unplugged wedding because she said that's making my job easier. So for doing that, then she offers them a little bit of a discount as a way to kind of encourage them to go the unplugged route during the ceremony.
Right.
So that might be an interesting tactic. You know, I don't know about the discount thing. I would talk to them more about like, here's the advantages of going with an unplugged wedding, and here's the disadvantages of going with a plugged-in wedding. And then let them decide from there, right? But
well, the discount I think really makes then it's something tangible that the couple like are going to strive more towards. Oh my gosh, you're going to get whatever she gives, or whether you give like, I'll give you a free 16x20 if you just have a unplugged wedding for me, or whatever you want to do as the photographer. But
yeah, so I thought that was an interesting approach to go kind of get the unplugged. So let's say they've decided that they're not really, you know, they haven't forced the unplugged thing on their guests. They don't want to go that route. Is there any steps you take to deal to any proactive steps that you take? Because I always will see, like, I know the ones because they've slid over, they've gotten the aisle seat, they've got their SLR, they've got their tablet. Is there anything you do proactively with those guests before anything gets rolling to kind of educate them?
Well, then it just becomes a defensive tactic. I bring my paintball gun to the wedding and then
take them out. That's a good plan.
Raise that phone up and woof,
get
it right out of their hands.
Did you see that guy that was, I don't know if it was set up or if it was real, but he was running around with hedge clippers, and he was
in New York.
Yeah, in New York, and he was cutting people's selfie sticks.
I laughed so hard at that. I thought that was the greatest thing.
Yeah,
I mean, I think if you can identify the Uncle Harry, or as they were in the old days. I don't know what the new acronym would be.
The Uncle Bob or the Auntie Helen, or
right.
whatever.
But the ones that you said that, like, they get that aisle seat and they're pushing people out of the way to get in to make sure that they get in that seat, and like you could walk up and down the aisle and before the ceremony and sort of have a look, and and maybe you just talk to them and be like, hey, I just see that, you don't have to tell them that you suspect them or anything, like, but, hey, I noticed you have your phone and that's great. And, will you just keep in mind at the end of the ceremony not to stick your phone out in the aisle or whatever, because it'll be in the bride and groom shot. And if you do it, I'm going to go ahead and take the picture, but they're going to they'll know who it is, or whatever. If you can nicely say that, because if you sort of put that fear of God in them, like, oh yeah, they're going to know that it was me that ruined the picture, or, or please don't, luckily some aisles, people kind of have barriers, or there's flowers that go by and they can't necessarily jump up. But if you do have an aisle where that's possible and you suspect it, just talk to the guests before. I've done it before, because sometimes as the photographer, you see the overzealous person, running around taking pictures, and sometimes it's an aunt or a mom or, and it may be an uncomfortable conversation to have, but it's a necessary conversation to have.
Yeah, we've even had it once where we weren't allowed to photograph the ceremony. This came from the priest. So once the bride got to the front of the aisle and was handed off, at that point we had to stop taking photos during the rest of the ceremony. And then the priest said he would stage. You can see my eye roll if you're watching. He would restage the first kiss and a couple of the other moments, and we were just like, okay. So we had to sit in the pew while all this stuff was going on. But of course, the priest made no announcement at the beginning of the ceremony about the no photography thing. So there were a couple of guests that were up running around taking photos during the whole time, and there we were sitting in the pew kind of going, is anybody gonna say anything to these guys? Well, of course, at the reception, people came up to us and said, we noticed, can we ask a question? We noticed you weren't taking any photos during the ceremony. And we're like, yeah, we were under instructions from the priest. We weren't allowed to. And they're like, oh, we didn't realize that because other people were taking photos. We're like, yeah, we were aware of that. Have you ever run into that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever been told that I can't take pictures during a ceremony, but there's been times where, like, we can't be up at the front to take processional photos. You have to kind of shoot that from behind, or, banish to a balcony or things like that. Um, so, like, I've had to deal with those situations. I don't know that I've ever been told that I actually cannot photograph the ceremony. I mean, maybe back in the day I did a few Mormon weddings, but you're not even allowed inside the temple, so
Yeah.
it's a non-issue.
Yeah. No, this wasn't even anything like it was like a Protestant. It wasn't even like an ultra religious wedding or anything like that. He was just, I think the particular minister at this church was just a giant control freak. Yeah, he just, it wasn't, even the bride and groom didn't care for him, I think, but it was just too late at that point. So, we did what we could, but it was just disappointing that they didn't make any kind of announcement, and we ended up looking kind of, lazy because we weren't photographing during the ceremonies. So, so let's moving on. So I think we've kind of covered the unplugged stuff. There's some other things I want to talk about related to kind of guest photography. How do you respond to the request? And we've had this from a few brides and grooms over the years, that they have a friend, that's getting into photography. And that friend is offered to, tag along as like a third photographer to, build their portfolio or what have you. And the bride and groom says, "Oh, my friend is going to come with their camera. Hope that's okay." How do you handle those? Have you had those requests? And
yeah, absolutely. And I typically try to put an end to that. And I actually wanted to talk about this, so that's kind of a good segue along the same lines. Is I find more and more too now, and in the last two weddings that I've done, there's absolutely been the case. There is a third photographer there, be it from the planner or the florist or someone that's also taking pictures. And you're kind of like, and 9 out of 10 times, like, I mean, actually probably 10 out of 10 times, I don't think they're dressed like crap. They look slovenly, if you will. Like, I dress up to a wedding, I dress appropriate at a wedding. I wear a suit or a tux depending on the type of event that I'm at.
Yep.
And I don't want people assuming, this would be the same for the friend, that they're with myself or my team.
Yeah.
So I tell them exactly that. And I tell them that it's a distraction. I tell them that I don't mind if your friend takes a few candids. I'm not going to stop your friend from doing that, but they cannot shoot what I'm shooting. They cannot shoot over my shoulder. And they cannot, like I said, they want to, that's the problem I have with these people that are there taking pictures for the florist or whoever, in that they're some photographer that hasn't earned the right to be at the caliber of wedding that I'm photographing, and they're taking pictures for their portfolio.
Right.
Beyond what they're doing. And that's typically, you watch them and they do that. They're sneaking other photos, like they're taking pictures during the ceremony. I had mine this last weekend, and she took a picture of, stopped the couple and took a picture of the couple. I was out on the grounds doing pictures, and she's like, "Oh, yeah, I can take a picture." I was like, I kind of just stood behind them so that I was in the photo.
Yeah.
Photo
bomber.
Right. But like that type of stuff, like that really gets under my skin, because again, like, I don't care if you think it sounds arrogant. You did not earn the right to be at that wedding. I did. And I have the same feeling when it comes to like third shooters, or even if people that I bring, like, I get a lot of people ask if they want to assist me. And I said, look, and who I decide to let, but I tell them all this. And I said, you can come to my wedding. I just want to, like, a lot of time with the third shooter, I want to see what they see. But, now in today's world, I give them my own cards. I'm like, you shoot on my cards and you give them back to me. And if I have somebody in a long term, this is a side note, but you've been with me for a long time, you're a second shooter, whatever, but you want to use a couple of the images you take. If you're loyal to me and you're good, fine. I'll let you use those images. But my only caveat is that, if it were to come and you're showing a couple of these pictures, and you're honest with them and you say, well, I did shoot at this wedding, but I was a second shooter with whoever.
Yeah.
But anyway, like these people that come along, like I really just I actually have a clause in my contract that says that I am the only photographer, and I name these things, like no friends with nice equipment, the planners, the florists, other people cannot have other photographers there. Now, sometimes, of course, I can't stop that because they just show up, but they've signed the contract. If they, you know, and I sort of deal with it on a case-by-case basis, but if they deal with, you know, they're not obnoxious, but if it's becoming a problem, or this was back years ago, but it was the same thing. There was some photographer there, and she's like running around, and I had it the same thing this last weekend at my wedding. Like, I'm trying to shoot detail, which if you know to shoot detail in a ballroom, it's like, it's a rarity that you get the room clear,
Yeah,
or even a side of the room clear when you're trying to get one side. And here I have all the waiters out, but I have this other photographer doing their own pictures.
Yeah.
Get out of my way. Like, I don't care who you are or who you're with. Like, and I'll say something to them. I'm very polite about it. I'm venting my frustration here,
Yep.
but I'm very polite about it. But, you know, it's like those things that are just like, it's just so aggravating. But back in the day, so I had this girl, and she had her crap strewn all over the ballroom floor of tripods in her bag, and, you know, and the mom tripped on it, and like the planner, I don't know who, whatever, someone started to get mad at me, and I was like, yeah, that's not my stuff. She is not with me. She's with the planner or the florist or whatever. That's not my team. And the mom was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. But, you know, it's like, I don't want that assumption. I don't want
guilty by association,
because the guests don't know that. I'm not going to walk around the room and tell every guest, oh, by the way, that douche over there is not with me.
Yeah, what happens at like videographers, same things happen to us too, where, you know, videographer shows up in jeans or t-shirt or whatever,
Exactly.
and then they assume like, oh, like they're with them. Like, no, they're a separate company. Even this wedding we had this last weekend, there was a photo booth at the wedding, and it didn't open till kind of later on at the reception. And as people kept coming up to me going, when are you opening the photo booth? And I'm like, that's not our photo booth. That's not our responsibility. That's somebody else is looking after that. And then they just were like, oh, and then they walked away. Right. But they just assume if it's got anything to do with photography, it's, you know, they're going to look at the photographer first. Right. So,
right.
Okay. One last question, and then we'll move on to our listener question, but I got another question. What about during family formals? Do you have any tips or advice, you know, for dealing with guests? Because that always happens when you're doing family formals. There's always people there with cameras wanting to shoot over your shoulder or trying to shoot that formation because whatever they
or asking you to take the picture with their iPhone.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you handle that?
Again, it's just part of the education. I talk to them ahead of time about it, but in the moment, you know, I say to them, you know, if I'm talking ahead of time, I'm like, because if people are taking pictures all around, what's going to happen is the more people I have in a group, the more eyes, you know, I need to get to focus on me. And if they're not, and they're looking other places, your pictures are going to suffer from that. You're going to get the pictures back and go, Robert, why are 10 of the people looking to the right and to the left and not at you? I mean, it makes your photos look bad. So I said, if there's a problem, because some people will say, oh yeah, my mom or whoever is going to be an issue or whatever. And I say, do I have, you know, do you mind if I talk to those people in the moment if it becomes a problem? And then I say no. I mean, they usually say yes, and then I will professionally hand it. If it's still a problem, then I walk straight up to the bride and groom and say, you know, under my breath, and, you know, I'm like, hey, the woman over there or the guy over there, it's really a distraction. I've actually asked them to stop and they won't stop. Will you please say something? And now the bride will, or usually the bride or the groom will like, hey, knock it off. And now they're camera down and get the photo. Now they're publicly embarrassed in front of the whole crowd.
Yeah.
And they can be mad at me for, I don't even care, but I try to deal with it. And usually at first, if I do see someone, and, you know, again, in the moment, I will even maybe, like, because there's several people, I like, look, you guys, I need to take this photo and I need everyone to focus on me. So can you please not hold your cameras up or take pictures while I'm doing it? You can take it after my shot's done. But I just work quickly. Like, I'll shoot it and then I'll just tear the group apart. I'm like, okay, well now I need, you know, all the cousins get out of the picture. And, you know, I start to tear it apart and I walk up really fast. Like, I'll walk up and stand in front of the couple.
Yeah.
A lot of times when I do my group shots, if I work with, you know, my typical regular second shooters, I actually don't shoot them. My second shooters shoot them and I direct everyone. So I make sure that I'm in front of the couple and the families all the time so that they don't really have a clean shot at it. And then I just step out of the way for, you know, the pictures for that particular group. And then I'm right back in there tearing it apart. So there's many ways to deal with it, I think, but still, most importantly, you need to be subtle. Even if this makes you mad and you feel my pain and your pain. You have to do it subtly. You have to, handle it professionally, because you are still a reflection of what goes on the wedding day.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, you don't want to be a jerk about it. If we're not under a super time crunch, and I know I've got a little bit of time, and it's a little smaller groupings, and there is that family member that just insists on getting photos. Sometimes I will, I'll step aside and say, hey, let's let you get in here and get a shot, right? And then, after a couple times, people realize like, hey, this is going to take a long time, and then the bride and groom will just say, Bruce has got this. You guys put your cameras away, and usually that kind of nips it in the bud, because they don't want to stand there for 45 minutes doing photos either. So sometimes I'll actually encourage them, say, come on in, you get the, and then they realize like, this is going to take a long time if this happens.
Right.
And they say something, and then usually I find that kind of kills it. That kind of nips it in the bud.
Yeah.
As well. Another strategy that we use to kind of deal with it, right? Or I'll have my wife go over and politely ask them to stop, right? Because because people aren't focusing on me. And it always seems to be the grandparents. I don't know, but they're always the ones looking off the wrong. I'm like, no, this camera, right? So
I was just editing my pictures from the wedding. I did this last weekend, and there was one grandma. They had actually quite a few grandparents, and there was one grandma, like every picture I took of her in the group shots, she's not looking. Yeah. And then there was pictures of her on the dance floor blinking. Like this woman, for whatever reason, just didn't take one good photo that whole day. Like,
she just didn't. Yeah, sometimes that happens. Yeah, I've had that as well.
You try to like, okay, everyone look, grandma, smile, grandma, and they like refuse to look at you. I'm like, and again, you just have to kind of move on. But
yep, it's all you can do.
A little trick that you could always do if somebody, I mean, they're going to catch it in today's world, but like this goes back to film. But if they ask you to take a picture with their camera, just put your finger in front of the flash, or, somehow block the lens a little bit with part of your finger. And and then by the time you do that and they realize that you did it, you've already ripped a group apart.
You've moved on to the next one. Yeah. And then they'll be like, oh, it's fine.
You're like, oh, excellent. I'm just not used to that.
I'm not used to that camera. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, hopefully that gives people some food for thought when it comes to unplugged weddings and kind of dealing with the overzealous wedding guests with devices. So we're going to take a quick break to thank our sponsor, and after the break, we're going to answer a question from one of our listeners. So this episode of TWiP Weddings is brought to you by FreshBooks. And FreshBooks just launched an all-new version of their cloud accounting software. It's been redesigned from the ground up and custom built to transform how freelancers and small business owners, such as wedding photographers, get to deal with their day-to-day drudgery of paperwork. So if you are looking for a solution to start invoicing and track your expenses, getting started on FreshBooks is really simple. Even if you're not a numbers person, which probably I would say a lot of photographers are not numbers people necessarily. No. FreshBooks is a great solution for you. It's got a very intuitive interface. It's very easy to create and send professional looking invoices. You can do up an invoice in less than 30 seconds. So I've actually won jobs because I was able to get the invoicing to a client. It was a commercial job, in this case, not a wedding job, but I got the invoice to the client really quickly. And that was one of the reasons they hired me, was because, we were good on top of things with the bookkeeping. Their previous photographer would take months to get them an invoice, which you would think a company would, not want to pay quickly, but they wanted to pay quickly. So, using a tool like FreshBooks, you can get that invoice out right away. There's no formatting, there's no formulas. It's basically just like typing. They tried to make it they did a lot of research, and they found a lot of people were using like a word processing, like Word, to do their invoices. Right. So they tried to make it very similar to that. So it's just like typing in Word. You can create, add your own logo, customize it with your own color scheme so that it reflects your brand. And then when you send out an invoice, FreshBooks can show you if your client has seen it. I really like that option, because then you don't, that excuse of, oh, we didn't get the invoice. Now you can actually see when they received it. They've also revealed some other features to help keep you organized and streamline the business side of things. There's a new dashboard. It's been redesigned and curated to answer the most important question of, how is my business doing? So you can know at a glance what is owed, overdue, and whether you're in the red or the black, I guess. The notification center works like your personal assistant. It can tell you what's changed in your business since your last login and what should be dealt with, things like overdue invoices. FreshBook also automates late payment email reminders, so you can spend less time chasing down clients for money. You can now take pictures of receipts on your phone using FreshBooks iOS app. And FreshBooks will also handle your time tracking. So when it comes time to create an invoice, you'll know what you did and when you did it. So just get ready for the simplest way to be more productive and organized. Most importantly, get paid quickly. So FreshBooks is offering a 30-day unrestricted free trial to our audience. To claim it, just go to freshbooks.com/weddings and enter weddings in the How Did You Hear About Us section to start your 30-day free trial today. We thank FreshBooks for their support of TWiP Weddings. All right, so we're going to move on and answer a listener question. So each week we'll choose a listener question to answer on the show. This week our question is from, and I really hope I don't butcher your name, Otwan Fuller. I hope I said that right. So Otwan asks, fellow wedding shooters, what are your thoughts and experiences with Facebook ads to generate wedding photography business? Same question for generating portrait business. I realize portrait is broad. He specifically is looking at maternity and newborn, but he's open to hearing about all, and maybe someone else from the group will benefit as well. So he'd like to experiences with Facebook ads. I wish we had Brian on the show because I know he's got quite a bit of experience with Facebook ads, but I want to toss it over to you, Robert, to see have you experimented with Facebook advertising and what's been your experience with it?
I haven't really, done much of it. I mean, what I do know about it is I could see it working in that, because you can dial it into like where you want it, what your demographic is. It could just be, in your immediate town if you wanted, and you could just target females, and you can just target females with children.
Or recently engaged.
Or recently engaged for weddings, because of course everybody puts their engaged status. So it's nice because it does that. And from what I've seen, you don't have to spend a ton of money at first if you don't want to. I mean, you could do a 30-day campaign and say, well, I only do $100. So you're only going to so many impressions a day, but it's going to target just those people that meet that. And I mean, hey, to try it for 100, 200, 500, however, whatever you want to do, and do some tests and see what results you get from it. I think it's a pretty viable option.
Yeah, I know that Brian has a lot of experience with Facebook ads, so I'll dig up. I think he wrote an article on it over at Sprouting Photographer, so I'll try and link to that. But I know that the big thing is that it has this pixel tracking technology that you can basically put in on your website. And then if people, it's connected to your Facebook ads. And so if they visit your website, there's this little pixel. And then when they go back to their Facebook, they'll start seeing your ads if you're doing the Facebook ads. And I remember Brian telling the story of he had met with this one bride and groom about potentially booking their wedding. And they didn't book with him. And then a few months went by and they came back to him and said, for some reason, just after we saw you and met with you, we just kept seeing you all the time on Facebook, and we felt like that was like a calling, and he ended up booking them to book their wedding. Well, what was going on behind the scenes was there was the Facebook, the pixel tracking. So they had visited his website, and then they were seeing the ads because they had been to his site. So I know that's a big kind of important piece of the Facebook ad puzzle, is using that
Right.
pixel, that embedded pixel. So that'll be something to research and look into if you're thinking and contemplating doing Facebook ads. But just to add on to what Robert said, I think if you're going to do something like that, I think if you just do it kind of like $50, try it, and it doesn't work, I think you're probably not going to see a lot of success. I think like anything, you have to have a strategy behind it. You have to really think about what you want to achieve and try it for a while. Don't just try it for like 1 week and give up on it. Because I think to get the results that you're looking for, you probably need to do it for a little while, like any kind of ad-based campaign, right? So, but I do like the ability to target it, which is great. So hopefully that helps.
Was that question on the Facebook page?
That was on our Facebook page, yes. Yeah.
So then maybe we could talk with Brian and link, or Brian can go on there and comment and say, here's the article that I wrote about it.
Yeah, for sure. Excellent. Well, of course, if you've got a question for us, we want to hear from you. Just head on over to thisweekinphoto.com and leave your question by clicking on the Contact Us button. Choose Weddings. You can also email us at twipwed@thisweekinphoto.com or send out a tweet. Use the hashtag TWIPWed to ask us a question. All right, let's carry on. And we've got our next segment, which is our picks of the week. Each week, we will choose a photography-related item that we think would be a benefit to wedding photographers. Our picks can be anything as long as we can somehow connect it to photography or the business of photography. So, Robert, what have you got for us this week?
So I guess this week, it's this show. We do so much prep, and this is always the hardest thing. What's the pick of the week going to be?
Yes.
But I think this week, recently, Sony just announced yet another iteration of the A6000. So we have the A6000, we have the A6300, and now the A6500.
They're just busy little beavers over at Sony.
Probably like one of my favorite Sony cameras in that it's small, especially if you shoot sports or action. It shoots 12 frames a second. It's the fastest autofocusing camera out there.
So what's new with this 6500 over the 6300?
They, a little bit more of it has in-camera image stabilization now as well. It has even a little better quality 4K. Like, I don't have one in my hands yet.
Yeah.
They've even improved the focusing system more. But what I love about this camera, I think it's a great camera for anybody that's like maybe thinking about transitioning to Sony. I always know that, it's a fairly inexpensive body. I think around $1,500.
Yep.
And really, if you still, that's too much. Start at the 6000. It's still an amazing camera. I still love my 6000, and those are about $500 now just for the body.
Wow.
And you can always get a Metabones adapter to shoot your Canon or your Nikon lenses or whatever camera you might be coming from, to really kind of give it a try. But that's what I really like about it. If people are like, oh, I'm thinking about Sony, I usually suggest, well, I ask them what they shoot, of course, but I usually suggest, try that camera first. Really, for a couple $1,000s, if you could get a camera and a lens, a Sony lens, and, really, not just the kit lens that comes on it, and really, give it a try. And it's super light, fits in the palm of your hand. It's still, I think, from all the things they put out, still my favorite, especially for my go-to sports camera.
So it's the gateway drug for Sony.
Exactly. The 6500.
That's excellent. Yeah, I tempted to get one of those, but I just picked up recently, this is my pick of the week, is the new Canon 5D Mark IV.
Nice.
So we've been waiting for this camera for a while. It's been a few years. I think it's been 4 years now since the Mark III came out.
Has it been that long?
It has, yeah.
Wow.
So so we were due for one. It was still one of our fourth body was a 5D Mark II still. Mm-hmm. So we it was time. So that was time to move on from that one. It was our fourth body, and one of the reasons was I just didn't want to have a body that didn't have dual card slots anymore. So it was time for that one. Time for that one to go. It had served its purpose. But what compelled me with the Mark IV is they finally got around to putting Wi-Fi in the camera, so you can do what a lot of cameras have been able to do for a while now, is transmit the photo from your SLR to your phone. So if you do, ironically, we were speaking about the unplugged weddings, but one of the reasons now is that urgency to get the photo out right away, to get that sneak peek out right away, right? So no more having to take a cell phone picture of the back of my camera. I can actually now take a photo and transmit it right to my phone, which is pretty cool. I'm really, really liking just the dynamic range so far. I've only shot a few weddings with it, but the dynamic range on this is exceptional. The ISO, again, as every time a new camera comes out, it's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary, but the ISO performance is great. I can shoot that at 6400 and it looks like 1600 on some of our other cameras. So it's, they've done a really nice job with that. I don't do a lot of video, but it does shoot 4K. Some will say it's not full 4K because it's cropped, but whatever, it shoots 4K and it's got a nice touch screen on it now, which is quite nice. But
yeah, I saw that. That looks pretty cool.
Yeah, so just it's faster. It's definitely faster. Autofocus is improved again, as to be expected. So the usual improvements that you would expect from a new camera. So that was my recent gear acquisition, was the 5D Mark IV. So that's my pick, which I'm sure many people by now will have got one of those. But Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of TWiP Weddings. We want to thank our sponsor, FreshBooks, for their support. And we want to remind you to send in your questions for the show and share your thoughts by commenting on the blog post for this episode. So before we bid adieu, what have you got going on, and where can our audience go to keep up with you, Mr. Evans?
Well, if you want to find me, it's pretty easy. Just put my name in your Google window, and
In the Googles.
between me and the producer, Robert Evans, you'll find me. But really easy. My website's robertevans.com. My Instagram and my Twitter are at Robert Evans, and Facebook is Robert Evans Studios.
Excellent. Very good. And if you are looking for me, you'll find me over at my website, which is momentsindigital.com. And if you're looking for me on the social networks, I'm at Bruce Clark with an E at the end of Clark on the majority of social networks. So the ones I'm on most frequently anyway. So that's where you'll find us. Of course, we'll also put links to Brian's as well. Brian wasn't with us today, but we'll hopefully be back on the next show. And we'll put links to all of his profiles as well. And of course, be sure to visit our website at thisweekinphoto.com for our show and all the other great shows that are part of the TWiP network. And thank you again for listening to TWiP Weddings, raising the bar one wedding at a time.